They were teeing off on the 18th hole when the helicopter appeared. My father, Harrison Brooks, was mid-swing when the distinctive green and white Sikorsky descended onto the pristine fairway of Hilton Head Harbour Town Golf Links, its rotor wash sending sand traps into small tornadoes and bending the perfectly manicured grass flat. I watched from 200 yards away as his $500 driver clattered to the cart path and his face went the particular shade of red I remembered from childhood, the color that meant someone had embarrassed him in front of people who mattered. The Marine Corps officer who stepped out of my escort vehicle didn't salute me. We don't do that outside in civilian areas, makes you a target if anyone's watching. But his posture said everything about why we were there. Staff Sergeant Natalie Brooks, the President needs you in D.C. for the security briefing. We have 90 minutes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I could see my father from where I stood at the clubhouse entrance. His golf partners, the usual collection of Charleston real estate developers and Lowcountry old money, had scattered like startled birds. Only Harrison Brooks remained frozen on the fairway, staring at the helicopter that had violated his sacred Saturday morning ritual, the one thing in his perfectly controlled world that represented order and tradition and the right kind of people doing the right kind of things. He had no idea I was the reason Marine One support team had just ruined his golf game. He had no idea his daughter, the one he'd called just a grunt at last year's Christmas dinner, was the Marine responsible for coordinating the President's security detail for tomorrow's Veterans Day ceremony. He had no idea that in 72 hours, everything he'd built his identity around was going to collapse, and that I would be the one holding the evidence that brought it all down. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 32 years old, a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and for most of my life, I was invisible to the man who was supposed to be my father. Not because I was difficult or disappointing in the traditional sense. I graduated high school with honors, lettered in 3 sports, volunteered at the VA hospital every Sunday. I did everything right. I just did it all wrong, according to Harrison Brooks, because I didn't do it the way he'd planned. The Brooks family has lived in Charleston, South Carolina since 1842. My father will tell you this within 5 minutes of meeting you, usually while gesturing toward the oil portrait of some Confederate colonel that hangs in the entrance hall of Palmetto House, our family estate in the historic district. Old money, old names, old expectations. Harrison Brooks Development Corporation owns half the commercial real estate between Charleston and Hilton Head, and my father has spent his entire adult life ensuring that everyone knows the Brooks name means something. My brother Trevor understood this instinctively. 8 years older than me, he absorbed the requirements of being a Brooks the way some people absorb language, naturally and without effort. He went to the Citadel for undergraduate, Harvard Business School for his MBA, joined the family company at 26 and made vice president by 30. He married Christine Morgan, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Southeast, in a ceremony at St. Michael's Episcopal Church that made the society pages of 3 different newspapers. He played golf every Saturday morning with father and the right kind of men. He said the right things at the right parties. He existed exactly as he was supposed to exist. I did not. The differences started early, though I didn't recognize them as problems until much later. Trevor got the bedroom on the 2nd floor of Palmetto House with the view of the garden and the original heart pine floors. I got the converted maid's quarters on the 3rd floor, smaller and hotter in summer, with a window that looked out at the neighbor's magnolia tree. When I asked Mother why, she said it was because Trevor was older and needed more space for his things. When I pointed out that he'd had that room since he was 6 and I was born, she changed the subject. Trevor's birthday parties were events. 30 children from the right families, catered food, a hired magician or petting zoo, or 1 year, inexplicably, a real mariachi band. My birthday parties stopped happening after I turned 8. Mother said I'd told her I didn't want a party, that I'd rather have a quiet day. I have no memory of saying this, but I learned not to argue with Mother's version of things. The pattern continued through childhood in ways that felt normal because I had no comparison. Trevor played tennis at the country club every Wednesday. I asked to join and was told the junior program was full. Trevor got a new BMW when he turned 16. I got mother's old Volvo wagon with 140,000 miles on it when I turned 17, and was told I should be grateful for the independence. Trevor's college applications were a family project, with father calling in favors at his alma mater and mother hiring a private admissions consultant. When I started looking at colleges, father handed me a stack of brochures for schools within an hour of Charleston and said I should stay local to save money. I didn't understand yet that I was being managed, contained, kept small. I thought I was just less interesting than Trevor, less worthy of investment. It didn't occur to me that the differential treatment was deliberate until the night I announced I was joining the Marine Corps. I was 19, home for winter break from the College of Charleston where I'd been studying criminal justice and hating every minute of it. The school was fine, but living at home while Trevor had gotten the full residential college experience felt like an extension of childhood rather than a step toward adulthood. I'd been meeting with a Marine recruiter for 3 months, taking practice tests, learning about the different occupational specialties available. The idea of the military appealed to something fundamental in me, a desire for structure that was earned rather than inherited, for respect that came from what you did rather than who your family was. I waited until after dinner, when we were all in the sitting room. Mother was reading a gardening magazine. Father was reviewing contracts. Trevor was on his phone, probably texting Christine about wedding venues. I stood in the doorway and said it quickly before I could lose my nerve. I've decided to enlist in the Marine Corps. I leave for boot camp in March. The silence that followed felt thick enough to drown in. Mother's magazine lowered slowly. Trevor's phone disappeared into his pocket. Father's pen stopped moving across the page, though he didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, his expression was the one I'd seen him use with contractors who'd disappointed him, pleasant but cold. "You're not doing that," he said. It wasn't a question or an opinion. They were teeing off on the 18th hole when the helicopter appeared. My father, Harrison Brooks, was mid-swing when the distinctive green and white Sikorsky descended onto the pristine fairway of Hilton Head Harbour Town Golf Links, its rotor wash sending sand traps into small tornadoes and bending the perfectly manicured grass flat. I watched from 200 yards away as his $500 driver clattered to the cart path and his face went the particular shade of red I remembered from childhood, the color that meant someone had embarrassed him in front of people who mattered. The Marine Corps officer who stepped out of my escort vehicle didn't salute me. "We don't do that outside in civilian areas, makes you a target if anyone's watching." But his posture said everything about why we were there. "Staff Sergeant Natalie Brooks, the President needs you in D.C. for the security briefing. We have 90 minutes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I could see my father from where I stood at the clubhouse entrance. His golf partners, the usual collection of Charleston real estate developers and Lowcountry old money, had scattered like startled birds. Only Harrison Brooks remained frozen on the fairway, staring at the helicopter that had violated his sacred Saturday morning ritual, the one thing in his perfectly controlled world that represented order and tradition and the right kind of people doing the right kind of things. He had no idea I was the reason Marine One support team had just ruined his golf game. He had no idea his daughter, the one he'd called just a grunt at last year's Christmas dinner, was the Marine responsible for coordinating the President's security detail for tomorrow's Veterans Day ceremony. He had no idea that in 72 hours, everything he'd built his identity around was going to collapse, and that I would be the one holding the evidence that brought it all down. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 32 years old, a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and for most of my life, I was invisible to the man who was supposed to be my father. Not because I was difficult or disappointing in the traditional sense. I graduated high school with honors, lettered in 3 sports, volunteered at the VA hospital every Sunday. I did everything right. I just did it all wrong, according to Harrison Brooks, because I didn't do it the way he'd planned. The Brooks family has lived in Charleston, South Carolina since 1842. My father will tell you this within 5 minutes of meeting you, usually while gesturing toward the oil portrait of some Confederate colonel that hangs in the entrance hall of Palmetto House, our family estate in the historic district. Old money, old names, old expectations. Harrison Brooks Development Corporation owns half the commercial real estate between Charleston and Hilton Head, and my father has spent his entire adult life ensuring that everyone knows the Brooks name means something. My brother Trevor understood this instinctively. 8 years older than me, he absorbed the requirements of being a Brooks the way some people absorb language, naturally and without effort. He went to the Citadel for undergraduate, Harvard Business School for his MBA, joined the family company at 26 and made vice president by 30. He married Christine Morgan, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Southeast, in a ceremony at St. Michael's Episcopal Church that made the society pages of 3 different newspapers. He played golf every Saturday morning with father and the right kind of men. He said the right things at the right parties. He existed exactly as he was supposed to exist. I did not. The differences started early, though I didn't recognize them as problems until much later. Trevor got the bedroom on the 2nd floor of Palmetto House with the view of the garden and the original heart pine floors. I got the converted maid's quarters on the 3rd floor, smaller and hotter in summer, with a window that looked out at the neighbor's magnolia tree. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I asked Mother why, she said it was because Trevor was older and needed more space for his things. When I pointed out that he'd had that room since he was 6 and I was born, she changed the subject. Trevor's birthday parties were events. 30 children from the right families, catered food, a hired magician or petting zoo, or one year, inexplicably, a real mariachi band. My birthday parties stopped happening after I turned 8. Mother said I'd told her I didn't want a party, that I'd rather have a quiet day. I have no memory of saying this, but I learned not to argue with Mother's version of things. The pattern continued through childhood in ways that felt normal because I had no comparison. Trevor played tennis at the country club every Wednesday. I asked to join and was told the junior program was full. Trevor got a new BMW when he turned 16. I got Mother's old Volvo wagon with 140,000 miles on it when I turned 17, and was told I should be grateful for the independence. Trevor's college applications were a family project, with father calling in favors at his alma mater and mother hiring a private admissions consultant. When I started looking at colleges, father handed me a stack of brochures for schools within an hour of Charleston and said I should stay local to save money. I didn't understand yet that I was being managed, contained, kept small. I thought I was just less interesting than Trevor, less worthy of investment. It didn't occur to me that the differential treatment was deliberate until the night I announced I was joining the Marine Corps. I was 19, home for winter break from the College of Charleston, where I'd been studying criminal justice and hating every minute of it. The school was fine, but living at home while Trevor had gotten the full residential college experience felt like an extension of childhood rather than a step toward adulthood. I'd been meeting with a Marine recruiter for 3 months, taking practice tests, learning about the different occupational specialties available. The idea of the military appealed to something fundamental in me, a desire for structure that was earned rather than inherited, for respect that came from what you did rather than who your family was. I waited until after dinner, when we were all in the sitting room. Mother was reading a gardening magazine. Father was reviewing contracts. Trevor was on his phone, probably texting Christine about wedding venues. I stood in the doorway and said it quickly before I could lose my nerve. I've decided to enlist in the Marine Corps. I leave for boot camp in March. The silence that followed felt thick enough to drown in. Mother's magazine lowered slowly. Trevor's phone disappeared into his pocket. Father's pen stopped moving across the page, though he didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, his expression was the one I'd seen him use with contractors who'd disappointed him, pleasant but cold. "You're not doing that," he said. It wasn't a question or an opinion. It was simply a statement of fact, as though my announcement had been a misunderstanding he was correcting. "I've already signed the papers. I ship out in 12 weeks. Now Father stood, setting aside his contracts with the careful precision he used when he was truly angry. "Natalie, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is absurd. You're a Brooks. We don't send our children off to be grunts." The word hit me strangely. Grunts. I knew it was military slang for infantry Marines, for the people who did the hard physical work of combat. But the way Father said it made it sound like something shameful, something beneath us. It's an honorable profession, I said quietly. Grandfather was Navy. He served in Vietnam. Father's face did something complicated. Your grandfather was an officer. An admiral. That's completely different. He led people. He made decisions. You're talking about taking orders from people who couldn't get into a decent college. Trevor spoke up then, his tone reasonable and measured, the voice of someone trying to help me see sense. Nat, think about this practically. You have a future here. Father's been talking about bringing you into the marketing department once you finish your degree. You could work on the Heritage Properties campaign, use that history degree of yours. I don't have a history degree. I'm studying criminal justice. Trevor blinked. Oh. Well, whatever you're studying, the point is you have options here. The Marine Corps is for people who don't have options. Mother finally contributed, her voice soft and worried. Darling, it's dangerous. You could be deployed. You could be hurt. Why would you choose that when you have a perfectly good life here? Because this isn't my life, I said, and I heard my voice crack slightly. This is your life. All of you. The company, the country club, the right schools and the right people and the right address. I don't fit into any of it, and I'm tired of pretending I want to. Father's expression shifted from anger to something colder, more final. If you do this, you're on your own. No family support, no money beyond what the military pays you, no coming back here when you realize you've made a mistake. You'll be cutting yourself off from everything we've built. I understood then that this was a test, an ultimatum designed to make me back down. Father was used to people backing down. His business strategy depended on it, finding someone's pressure point and applying exactly enough force to make them fold. I'm okay with that, I said. Trevor stood up, walking toward me with his hands out in a placating gesture. Come on, Nat. You don't mean that. Sleep on it. Talk to someone at school, a counselor or someone. You're just going through some phase. I'm not going through a phase. I've thought about this for months. I want to serve. I want to do something that matters. Being a Brooks matters, Father said, and his voice had gone quiet in a way that was worse than yelling. But apparently that's not good enough for you. Fine. Go play soldier. But don't expect us to celebrate your poor decisions. Mother made a small sound of protest, but Father silenced her with a look. The conversation was over. I went upstairs to my small room on the 3rd floor and started packing the things I'd need for the next 12 weeks, and I didn't cry because I'd learned a long time ago that crying in Palmetto House was something you did alone. I shipped out to Paris Island, South Carolina in March. The Marine Corps recruit depot was only 2 hours from Charleston, close enough that some recruits had family visit on family day during training. Mine didn't come. I'd sent them the information, the dates and times and the address, but the day arrived and I stood in formation watching other recruits embrace their parents and siblings, and the Brooks family was nowhere to be seen. My drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Martinez, noticed. She was a compact woman from Texas with a voice that could strip paint and a way of seeing through whatever face you tried to show the world. After the ceremony, she pulled me aside. Your people didn't show, she said. Not a question. No, Staff Sergeant. Their loss, she said. You're a good Marine, Brooks. Better than most of these entitled brats who think they're doing the country a favor by showing up. You're here because you want to be here. That matters. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged my choice as valid rather than crazy or disappointing. I felt something unlock in my chest, some tight knot I'd been carrying since that night in the sitting room at Palmetto House. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. She nodded once, sharp and final. Now get out of here. Liberty starts in 20 minutes and you look like you could use a beer, except you can't have one because you're not 21. So go get pizza instead. I did get pizza, with 3 other Marines from my platoon who'd also had complicated family days for various reasons. We didn't talk about our families. We talked about where we wanted to be stationed, what occupational specialties we'd requested, whether the rumors about deployment schedules were accurate. We talked about the future instead of the past, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The years that followed were hard in ways I'd expected and ways I hadn't. The physical demands of being a Marine were intense but manageable. I'd always been athletic, and I discovered I was good at pushing through discomfort, at doing one more rep or running one more mile when my body insisted it was done. The mental demands were different. Learning to trust your unit, to follow orders even when they seemed arbitrary, to make split-second decisions that could mean life or death, those skills came harder. I requested intelligence as my occupational specialty and got it. The schooling was rigorous, months of training in analysis, linguistics, counterintelligence operations. I deployed 3 times in 6 years, twice to Afghanistan and once to Iraq, working in joint operations centers where we processed information from dozens of sources and tried to build pictures of threat networks and insurgent operations. I was good at it, the patient work of connecting disparate pieces of information into coherent narratives. In between deployments, I was stationed at Quantico, then Camp Lejeune, then back to Quantico when I got promoted to sergeant. I lived in small apartments off base, drove a used Honda Civic I'd bought with my deployment savings, ate at the same 3 restaurants near base that gave military discounts. My life was simple, purposeful, nothing like the elaborate social performance required in Charleston. I went home for Christmas exactly once in those 6 years. It was my 3rd year in, and I'd been back from Afghanistan for 2 months. Mother had sent several emails suggesting I visit, saying how much everyone missed me, how it would mean so much to see me. I'd resisted, knowing the visit would be uncomfortable, but eventually the combination of guilt and curiosity won out. I drove down from Quantico in my dress blues, arriving at Palmetto House on Christmas Eve. The house looked exactly as I remembered, the same elegant facade and perfect landscaping and discreet outdoor lighting that made everything look like a magazine photograph. I parked on the street rather than in the circular drive, suddenly conscious that my Honda didn't belong among the Mercedes and BMWs and one ridiculous Bentley that I assumed was Trevor's. Mother answered the door, and for a moment her face showed genuine warmth. "Natalie, oh darling, you look so grown up." Then she glanced past me at the street, and I saw her register the uniform, the car, the fact that I'd driven myself rather than flying in like someone with money. Come in, come in. Everyone's in the sitting room." Everyone turned out to be Father, Trevor, Christine, and 2 couples I vaguely recognized from country club events when I was younger. They were dressed for cocktail hour, the men in blazers and expensive slacks, the women in silk dresses and statement jewelry. I stood in the doorway in my uniform and felt like I'd shown up to the wrong party. Father's greeting was cordial but distant. "Natalie. Good of you to make it." He didn't stand, didn't offer a hug or handshake, just lifted his bourbon glass slightly in acknowledgement. Trevor was friendlier, at least superficially. "Hey, Nat, look at you, all official." He gestured to my uniform. "How's the military treating you?" "Well," I said. "I'm stationed at Quantico now. Intelligence work." "Oh, that's interesting. Christine and I were just in D.C. last month for a conference. Stayed at the Hay Adams. Beautiful hotel. You should visit next time you're up there. I live an hour north of D.C. Right. Well, you know, whenever you have time." The conversation moved on without me. The couples were discussing a planned golf trip to Kiowa Island, comparing notes on resort amenities and tea time prices. Father was complaining about some zoning issue affecting one of his developments. Christine was describing her work with the Junior League's fundraiser committee. I sat on the periphery, sipping water, contributing nothing because I had nothing to contribute to these conversations about country clubs and fundraisers and expensive vacations. Dinner was worse. We sat at the long dining table in the formal dining room, the one used only for holidays and important guests. I was placed at the far end, across from one of the couples, while Trevor and Christine flanked Father at the head of the table. The seating arrangement said everything about where I ranked in the family hierarchy. The conversation during dinner eventually turned to politics, specifically to military policy and defense spending. One of the men, a real estate attorney named Langford who'd apparently been father's business partner for decades, had opinions about wasteful Pentagon spending and unnecessary foreign interventions. "We're spending billions on conflicts that don't concern us," he said, cutting into his duck breast. "Meanwhile, the infrastructure here at home is crumbling. It's a matter of priorities." I'd heard this argument before, usually from people who'd never served and had no concept of what military readiness actually required. I usually stayed quiet, but something about sitting in my childhood home, in my uniform, listening to people who'd never sacrificed anything for their country criticize those who did, made me speak up. "With respect, sir, those conflicts directly concern us. The intelligence work we do prevents attacks on American soil. The relationships we build with allied forces create stability in regions that would otherwise become breeding grounds for terrorism." Langford looked at me with the expression adults use for children who've said something cute but misguided. "That's a very idealistic view, dear. But the reality is that most of what the military does is justify its own budget. It's a self-perpetuating system." "I've been deployed twice to Afghanistan," I said, keeping my voice level. "I've seen what happens when we're not there. I've processed intelligence on planned attacks that were stopped because we had people on the ground. This isn't theoretical for me." Father cleared his throat. "Natalie, I don't think this is the time for a political debate." "I'm not debating," I said. "I'm sharing my actual experience." "Your experience is limited to the perspective you've been given," Father said. "You see the tactical level. Richard and I deal with the strategic realities. We understand the economic implications of these policies. And I understand the human cost when those policies fail," I said. The table had gone quiet. Trevor was staring at his plate. Mother was doing that thing where she pretended to be very focused on her food. Christine looked uncomfortable, and the other couple had suddenly become fascinated by the Christmas centerpiece. Father's face had begun shifting toward that particular shade of red. "Natalie, you're a grunt. You follow orders and do your job. That's admirable in its way, but it doesn't give you insight into geopolitical strategy or fiscal policy. Leave those discussions to people who actually understand them." The word again. Grunt. But this time, said in front of guests, said with that tone that made it clear he thought my service was something between quaint and embarrassing. I set down my fork carefully. "I'm not a grunt, Father. I'm an intelligence analyst. I brief field commanders on threat assessments. I coordinate with CIA and NSA on joint operations. What I do requires understanding geopolitical strategy at a level most civilians never see. And yet you're sitting here in a uniform eating Christmas dinner while Trevor is running a multi-million-dollar division of our company. Which one of you has made better choices?" The cruelty was casual, delivered in the same tone he might use to comment on the weather. Trevor had made better choices because Trevor had stayed within the boundaries Father had drawn. I had made poor choices because I'd stepped outside them. I stood up from the table. "Thank you for dinner. I should get back to base." Mother made a small protesting sound. "Natalie, you just got here. Stay the night at least." "I think it's better if I go." Father had already returned his attention to his plate, the conversation apparently over as far as he was concerned. Trevor looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out what. The couples were definitely staring at the centerpiece now. I drove back to Quantico that night, 8 hours straight, and I didn't stop even when my eyes started burning with fatigue. I needed to put distance between myself and Palmetto House, between myself and the family that had never really felt like mine. I made it back to my apartment at 4 a.m, collapsed on my couch still in my dress blues, and made a decision. I wouldn't go back. Not for holidays, not for visits, not for the occasional phone call. I would build my life entirely separate from the Brooks family and their endless performance of respectability. I would be a Marine, and that would be enough. For 4 years, that's exactly what I did. I deployed again, this time to embassy security duty in Baghdad. I got promoted to staff sergeant. I earned a Bronze Star for actions during an embassy breach where I'd coordinated the evacuation of civilian personnel under fire. I got selected for advanced training in special operations liaison work, which meant I started working directly with special forces units on joint intelligence operations. My life became fuller and more demanding and more satisfying than anything I'd experienced growing up in Charleston. The Marines I worked with became my family, the kind of family that actually showed up for you. When I was hospitalized with a concussion from an IED blast near the embassy, my entire unit rotated through visiting. When I got promoted, they threw me a party at a terrible bar near base where the beer was cheap and the karaoke machine was broken, but everyone sang anyway. Mother still sent occasional emails, usually around holidays, brief notes saying she hoped I was well and suggesting I visit when I had leave. I responded politely but vaguely, never committing to anything. Trevor sent nothing, which was fine. Father sent nothing, which was also fine. I didn't think about them much. There was too much else to think about, too much work to do, too many missions to plan and execute and debrief. The Brooks family became something distant and irrelevant, people I'd known in another life. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. I got summoned to Marine Barracks, Washington for what I was told would be a routine briefing on a new Joint Task Force assignment. I drove up from Quantico expecting the usual conference room meeting, PowerPoint slides about operational parameters and communication protocols. Instead, I was escorted to a private office where a Marine colonel I didn't recognize was waiting with 2 Secret Service agents. "Staff Sergeant Brooks," the colonel said. "How would you feel about working at the White House?" I stared at the colonel, trying to process what he'd just asked. The White House wasn't a duty station you applied for. It was a position you were selected for, vetted for, handpicked for. Marines who worked at the White House were the most squared away, politically reliable, utterly uncontroversial service members the Corps could produce. I was good at my job, but I'd never thought of myself as White House material. The colonel must have read my confusion because he smiled slightly. "You've been on our radar for 2 years, Staff Sergeant. Your work in Baghdad was exemplary. Your intelligence assessments have been cited in 3 separate presidential daily briefings. Your clearance level is already appropriate, and your psychological evaluations suggest you handle pressure well. More importantly, you have something we desperately need right now." "What's that, sir?" "You're not impressed by power. You've worked with generals and ambassadors and you treat them exactly the same as you treat junior enlisted. That kind of perspective is valuable when you're coordinating security for someone surrounded by people who want things from him." One of the Secret Service agents spoke up then, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an expressionless face. "We've been watching your career with interest, Staff Sergeant Brooks. The President has requested enhanced military liaison for his security detail, someone who can coordinate between Secret Service, Marine security, and military intelligence assets. Your background in Special Operations Liaison makes you uniquely qualified. I'd be coordinating security for the President directly?" "You'd be part of a team," the agent said. "But yes, you'd have direct access and direct responsibility. It's a 2-year assignment. High visibility, high pressure, career making if you do it well." "When would this start?" "Immediately," the colonel said. "We need you to begin transition briefings next week. You'd officially transfer to Marine Barracks, Washington and work out of the White House beginning December 1st. That was 3 weeks away. I thought about my current assignment, the cases I was working, the transition that would need to happen. I thought about what this meant for my career trajectory, how a White House assignment would position me for future advancement. I thought about how my entire life had been about proving I was more than what my family thought I was, and this felt like the ultimate validation of that effort. "Yes, sir," I said. "I'd be honored." The next 3 weeks were a controlled chaos of briefings and security protocols and background checks that went so deep I was pretty sure they knew what I'd had for breakfast in 3rd grade. I moved into temporary quarters at Marine Barracks, Washington, a historic post in southeast D.C. that housed Marines assigned to ceremonial and security duties in the capital. My days became a rhythm of training sessions with Secret Service, coordination meetings with military intelligence liaisons, and detailed reviews of presidential security protocols. I learned the specific procedures for motorcade movements, the communication systems that connected dozens of agencies during presidential travel, the contingency plans for every conceivable threat scenario. I learned the personalities of the key players, which Secret Service agents preferred which communication styles, which military liaisons were territorial about their areas of responsibility. I learned how to brief efficiently, how to present threat assessments in ways that were comprehensive but not alarmist, how to coordinate between groups that didn't always want to coordinate. The work was intellectually demanding in ways I found deeply satisfying. Every detail mattered. Every protocol existed for a reason. The margin for error was exactly zero, and I'd always performed best under those conditions. I was so focused on the transition that I barely registered Thanksgiving approaching. Mother sent an email inviting me home for the holiday, her tone hopeful in that way that made me feel guilty for the distance I'd maintained. I sent back a brief response explaining I was in the middle of a critical job transition and couldn't take leave. She replied with understanding, but I could feel the disappointment between the lines. I spent Thanksgiving in the barracks dining facility with other Marines who were either on duty or, like me, had nowhere else they wanted to be. We ate turkey and dressing and talked about assignments and deployment stories, and it felt more like family than any meal at Palmetto House ever had. My official start date at the White House was December 3rd. I reported at 6 in the morning to begin what would become my standard routine, arriving before most of the staff, reviewing overnight intelligence reports, coordinating with the Secret Service night shift about any concerns, preparing briefing materials for the day's movements. The president had a full schedule that week, multiple events each day, and each one required its own security assessment and coordination plan. I met the president for the first time on my second day. He was reviewing his schedule for the day when I was brought in to brief him on a security concern regarding an evening fundraiser. I'd been nervous about the meeting, worried I'd stumble over protocols or say something inappropriate, but he put me at ease immediately. "Staff Sergeant Brooks," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I've read your file. Impressive work in Baghdad. That embassy breach could have been much worse without your coordination. Thank you, Mr. President. Just doing my job. That's what all the good ones say," he said. "The ones who need to tell me how great they are usually aren't. What do I need to know about tonight?" I walked him through the assessment, the potential protest activity near the venue, the additional screening protocols we'd implemented, the backup routes we'd established. He listened carefully, asked 2 smart questions that showed he actually understood the tactical considerations, then nodded. "Good. I trust your team's judgment. Let's make sure everyone stays safe and we still manage to raise some money for the party." The work consumed me completely for the next 3 months. Every day brought new challenges, new scenarios to plan for, new coordination requirements between agencies that didn't always play nicely together. I worked 14-hour days routinely, sometimes 16 or 18 when the president traveled. I lived on coffee and adrenaline and the satisfaction of doing something that mattered at the highest level. I was good at it. Better than good, according to my evaluations. The Secret Service agents I worked with began trusting my assessments. The military intelligence liaisons started coming to me first with concerns because they knew I'd actually do something about them rather than just filing reports. The president's chief of staff told me privately that I was the best military liaison they'd had in years because I focused on solutions rather than problems. In early March, 6 months into my assignment, I was selected to coordinate security for a major ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery on Veterans Day. It was a significant event, televised nationally, with multiple high-ranking officials attending, including the Vice President and Secretary of Defense. The planning required coordination between Secret Service, Arlington security staff, military police, and local law enforcement. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-profile assignment that could define a career. I threw myself into the planning with the same intensity one brought to everything. We walked the site a dozen times, identifying sight lines and access points and potential vulnerabilities. We coordinated with bomb detection units and counter-sniper teams. We planned primary and alternate routes for every VIP. We ran through contingency scenarios until everyone knew exactly what to do if something went wrong. 3 weeks before the ceremony, during a routine coordination meeting, one of the Arlington staff members mentioned that they'd received an unusual number of requests for VIP parking passes from a specific area of South Carolina. It wasn't a security concern exactly, just an administrative oddity they thought we should know about. South Carolina veterans groups often attended these ceremonies, but this year's requests were concentrated among donors and board members of a specific Charleston-based real estate development company. Brooks Development Corporation, the staff member said, checking his notes. They've requested parking for 12 vehicles, all VIP level. The company president personally called to ensure the requests would be accommodated. Said something about the family's long history of military service and wanting to show proper respect. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My father's company. My family. They were planning to attend the Veterans Day ceremony, the ceremony I was coordinating security for. The ceremony where I'd be highly visible, where my name would be in the program as the Marine Corps Security Coordinator, where the President himself would likely acknowledge the security team's work because he always did at major events. Harrison Brooks was going to find out exactly what his daughter the Grunt had become. I managed to keep my expression neutral. Just process the requests according to normal protocols. If they meet the criteria for VIP parking, approve them. If not, standard parking. The staff member nodded and moved on to the next agenda item, but I was barely listening. My mind was racing through implications and complications. My family would be there. They'd see my name in the program. They'd see me coordinating security for the President of the United States. Father would realize that the daughter he dismissed as just a grunt was now responsible for protecting the most important person in the country. Part of me wanted to savor that moment of realization, wanted to see his face when he understood how completely wrong he'd been about my choices and my capabilities. But another part of me, the part that still carried the weight of childhood rejection, felt anxious about the encounter. What if he dismissed this achievement too? What if he found some way to diminish it, to make it about his connections or his family name rather than my work? I pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the planning. The ceremony was in 3 weeks. I had more important things to worry about than my father's opinion of my career. The planning intensified as we approached the date. We ran full rehearsals with stand-ins for all the VIPs. We coordinated with the Marine Corps Band and the ceremonial units. We reviewed weather contingencies and medical evacuation procedures. Every detail was scrutinized and refined until the operation ran like precision machinery. 5 days before the ceremony, I was working late in my office at the White House, reviewing the final security assessment, when my phone rang. Private number, Virginia area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Natalie? It was Trevor's voice, tentative and uncertain. Is this a good time? I'm working. What do you need? He hesitated. I heard you're coordinating security for the Veterans Day ceremony at Arlington. That's impressive. Really impressive. How did you know that? It's in the pre-event materials they sent to VIP attendees. Your name's listed as the Marine Corps Security Coordinator. Father got the packet last week. I waited, saying nothing, wondering where this was going. He's planning to attend, Trevor continued. The whole family is. Mother, me, Christine. Father got VIP parking through some contact at the Veterans Administration. He's been telling everyone at the club about it, about how his daughter is working at the White House. I felt a flash of anger so pure it left me breathless. Now he wants to claim me? Now that it benefits him to have a daughter at the White House, suddenly I'm his daughter again? Nat, I know this is complicated. But maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe you could use this to reconnect, to show him he was wrong about you. I don't need to show him anything, I said, my voice colder than I'd intended. I've spent 12 years proving myself to people who actually matter. His opinion stopped being relevant a long time ago. He's still your father. Biologically, yes. In every other sense, not so much. Trevor sighed. I'm not defending him. I know he's been awful to you. But he's getting older, Nat. He had a health scare last year, some heart thing. Mother's worried about him. Maybe this could be a chance to fix things before it's too late. Why are you calling, Trevor? Really calling? Another pause. Because I've been thinking about how we treated you. How I treated you. I went along with everything, all the differential treatment, all the dismissiveness. I never stood up for you. I never questioned why you got the smaller room or why your achievements didn't get celebrated the same way mine did. I just accepted the benefits and didn't think about the cost to you. His honesty caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness or justification, not admission. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he continued. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. Christine pointed it out, actually. She comes from a big family where everyone's treated equally, and when I told her about our childhood, she was horrified. She made me see how messed up it all was. Okay, I said, not sure what else to say. Just think about it. About maybe talking to Father at the ceremony. You don't owe him anything, but maybe you owe yourself the chance to hear him acknowledge how wrong he was. We hung up shortly after, and I sat in my office staring at security assessments without seeing them. Part of me wanted to dismiss Trevor's call as manipulation, as an attempt to smooth things over for the family's benefit rather than mine. But something in his voice had sounded genuine, tired in a way that suggested he'd been carrying his own guilt about our family dynamics. I didn't know if I wanted reconciliation with my father. I didn't know if I even wanted the satisfaction of showing him my success. What I wanted was to do my job well, to coordinate a flawless ceremony, to ensure the president's safety and the event's success. Everything else was noise. The days before the ceremony passed in a blur of final preparations and coordination meetings. The weather forecast was favorable. All the security elements were in place. The rehearsals had gone smoothly. By the morning of Veterans Day, I was confident we were as prepared as we could be. I arrived at Arlington at 4:30 in the morning, while the cemetery was still dark and quiet. The security team was already there, running final checks on equipment and positions. We walked through the entire site one more time, confirming sight lines and communication protocols. By the time the sun rose, we were ready. The VIPs began arriving at 9. I watched from the Security Coordination Center as the motorcades pulled up, as Secret Service agents escorted officials to their designated areas, as the crowd of veterans and family members grew larger. Somewhere in that crowd was my family, but I couldn't think about that. I had a job to do. The president arrived at 10:15, right on schedule. His motorcade swept through the gates and proceeded to the designated arrival point. I coordinated the movement over the radio net, confirming each checkpoint as the vehicles passed. Everything was going exactly according to plan. The ceremony itself was moving and flawlessly executed. The Marine Corps band played the national anthem. The president delivered remarks honoring the service and sacrifice of veterans. The vice president laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Throughout it all, I monitored radio traffic and security feeds, watching for any anomaly or concern. There were none. As the ceremony concluded and the VIPs began departing, my supervisor, a Marine major named Torres, found me in the coordination center. Outstanding work, Brooks. Textbook operation. The president specifically asked me to pass along his thanks to you and the team. Thank you, ma'am. Team did great work. She smiled. He also said, and I quote, that young Marine knows what she's doing. Make sure she gets recognized for this. So expect some attention in your service record. I felt a flush of pride and satisfaction. This was what I'd worked for, recognition from people whose opinions actually mattered, acknowledgement of competence and dedication from those who understood what the work required. Brooks? Torres was looking at me with an odd expression. There's someone asking to see you. Says he's your father. I told him you were busy with post-event duties, but he's pretty insistent. Said something about VIP parking privileges meaning VIP access to staff. My stomach dropped. Of course he did. Of course father would assume that his parking pass entitled him to interrupt my work, to demand access to me as though I were another event amenity. I'll handle it, I said. Where is he? Near the main entrance gate. He's with a woman and another couple. I told the Marine at the gate that they needed to go through proper channels if they wanted to speak with staff, but your father seems to believe proper channels don't apply to him. I'll take care of it, I repeated. I walked toward the main gate with a strange mixture of dread and curiosity churning in my gut. I hadn't seen my father in 4 years. I hadn't spoken to him in longer than that. And now he was here, on my turf, wanting to talk to me in the middle of a major security operation, because apparently even Veterans Day at Arlington National Cemetery was an appropriate venue for Harrison Brooks to assert his importance. I spotted them near the gate, exactly where Torres had said. Father stood with his arms crossed, his face showing the irritation of someone kept waiting. Mother was beside him looking anxious and apologetic. Trevor and Christine stood slightly apart, and Trevor's expression when he saw me approaching suggested he knew this encounter was going to go badly. Father's face changed when he saw me, cycling through surprise and something that might have been pride before settling into a complicated expression I couldn't quite read. "Natalie," he said. "I need to talk to you. It's important." I stopped a careful distance away, conscious of my uniform and my role and the fact that dozens of security personnel and event staff were still working around us. "This isn't a good time. I'm in the middle of post-event operations. This will only take a minute. It's about your grandfather. Grandfather died 8 years ago. Whatever it is can wait until I'm off duty." "It can't wait," Father said, and I heard something urgent in his voice, something almost like fear. "We need to talk about what he left you. About what he knew." I stared at my father, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. Admiral William Brooks had died when I was 24, shortly after I'd completed my first deployment. I'd flown home for the funeral, sat in the back of St. Michael's Church during the service, and left immediately afterward without speaking to anyone. The estate had been settled years ago, divided between father and his sister, my Aunt Patricia, who lived in Richmond. There was nothing grandfather could have left me because I hadn't been included in the will. "What are you talking about?" I kept my voice level, professional, aware that we were standing in a public space where my demeanor reflected on the Marine Corps. "Not here," Father said, glancing around at the lingering crowd. "Can we go somewhere private? I'm on duty. Whatever this is about needs to wait." Mother stepped forward then, her hand reaching out but not quite touching my arm. "Natalie, please. Your father received a letter from your grandfather's attorney last week. There are things you need to know about your grandfather's service, about his record. Things that could affect you professionally." That got my attention. Grandfather's military record was impeccable. 3 decades in the Navy, rising from ensign to admiral, decorated for service in Vietnam, respected throughout the military community. His reputation was one of the few things about my family history I'd been genuinely proud of. If there was something problematic in his record, something that had been hidden, it could indeed affect my security clearance and my position. 20 minutes, I said. "There's a chapel near the administration building. Meet me there after I finish the post-event briefing." Father looked like he wanted to argue about the delay, but Trevor put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll be there," Trevor said. "Take whatever time you need." I walked back to the coordination center and forced myself to focus on the debrief. Major Torres led the meeting, reviewing what had gone well and identifying minor areas for improvement. The operation had been successful by every measure. The president had been pleased. No incidents, no surprises, no failures. It should have felt like a triumph, but I kept thinking about Father's words. About what he left you. About what he knew. The briefing concluded after 30 minutes. I told Torres I needed to handle a personal matter and would file my written report by end of day. She nodded, clearly aware that something was going on but professional enough not to pry. I found my family in the small chapel, sitting in the front pew. The space was quiet and dim, afternoon light filtering through stained glass windows. They looked out of place somehow, Father in his expensive suit and Mother in her designer dress, Christine's pearls catching the light. They looked like they were waiting for a society wedding, not a conversation about military service. I sat across the aisle from them, maintaining distance. "Talk." Father pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, thick and official-looking. "This arrived at my office 6 days ago. From a law firm in Beaufort, South Carolina. Daniels and Associates. They handle estate matters for military families. Grandfather's estate was settled 8 years ago. The primary estate was settled, father corrected. But apparently grandfather maintained a separate property and separate accounts that weren't included in the main probate. A small house near the coast, paid in full, held in a private trust. The trust terms specified that information about the property and its contents would be released to you, and only you, upon the occurrence of 2 conditions. First, that you achieved the rank of staff sergeant or higher in any branch of military service. Second, that you were assigned to a position requiring top-secret security clearance or higher. I felt something cold move through my chest. Those were oddly specific conditions. Grandfather had died when I was still a sergeant, stationed at Camp Lejeune, working standard intelligence analysis. He couldn't have known I'd achieve staff sergeant. He couldn't have known I'd end up in a position requiring the highest levels of clearance. Unless he'd believed I would. Unless he'd known me better than I'd realized. What's in the house? I asked. We don't know, father said. The trust terms are very clear. Only you have access. Only you can receive the information about what's stored there. The attorney wouldn't tell me anything beyond the fact that it exists and that you now meet the conditions for disclosure. Why didn't you tell me about this when you first received the letter? Father's face did something complicated. Because I was hoping I could convince you not to pursue it. The attorney mentioned that the contents related to classified Navy operations from the 1970s and 80s. Whatever grandfather stored in that house, it's information he clearly didn't want discovered during his lifetime. Information he only wanted revealed to someone with the security clearance to handle it properly. Or information he only wanted revealed to someone he trusted, I said. Someone who'd actually served and understood what it meant. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. Nat, we need to think carefully about this. If there's something in grandfather's past that was questionable, something he felt he needed to hide, it could affect all of us. The Brooks name, the company, father's reputation in the veteran community. He's been using grandfather's service record to secure contracts with the VA for years. There it was. The real concern. Not what grandfather had done, not what truth might need to come to light, but how it might affect their reputation and their business. So you want me to just ignore it? Pretend I never met the conditions? Let whatever secrets grandfather kept stay buried? Father leaned forward, his expression intense. I want you to consider what opening this box might cost. Your career is going well. You're working at the White House. You have opportunities ahead of you. If you uncover something that requires you to report misconduct by a deceased admiral, do you think that won't blow back on you? The Navy protects its own, Natalie. They don't appreciate people airing historical dirty laundry, even if the people involved are dead. So I should protect the institution over the truth? I'm saying you should protect yourself, father said. And your family. Whatever grandfather did or didn't do, it was 50 years ago. It's ancient history. It doesn't need to be dredged up now. Mother spoke then, her voice soft and pleading. Darling, he's right. Sometimes the past should stay in the past. Your grandfather was a good man. If he made mistakes, if he did things during wartime that he regretted, does it serve anyone to expose that now? I looked at her, at the genuine distress in her face, and felt a flicker of the old guilt, the childhood programming that said keeping the family comfortable was more important than uncomfortable truths. But I'd spent 12 years learning different values, learning that integrity meant doing the right thing even when it was difficult, even when it cost you something. Did you read grandfather's letter? I asked. The one he left with the attorney? Father hesitated. The attorney wouldn't share it. He said it was for your eyes only. But you tried to get him to share it. Of course I tried. I'm your father. I have a right to know what my own father left behind. No, I said quietly. You don't. Grandfather made his choice about who he trusted with this information. He chose me. And whatever his reasons, I'm going to honor that choice. Christine spoke up then, her voice careful. Natalie, I understand wanting to honor your grandfather. But have you considered that he might have been protecting you by setting those conditions? That he only wanted this information revealed if you had the rank and clearance to handle it safely? Maybe the right way to honor him is to be very careful about what you do with whatever you find. It was a reasonable point, more thoughtful than anything Father had said. I nodded slowly. I will be careful. But I won't ignore it. I need to know what he wanted me to know. Father stood abruptly. Then you're on your own. If this blows back on the family, if it damages the company or our reputation, don't come to us for help. You'll have made your choice. The threat was familiar, the same ultimatum he'd delivered when I'd enlisted. Do what we want or you're cut off. Accept our version of reality or you're not part of this family. It had worked when I was 19, scared and uncertain. It didn't work now. I've been on my own since I was 19, I said. This doesn't change anything. I walked out of the chapel into the November afternoon, leaving my family sitting in the pews. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline and anger mixing with something else, a strange anticipation. Grandfather had left me something. He'd trusted me specifically, had believed I'd achieve rank and clearance and had waited for that moment to reveal whatever he'd kept hidden. I drove back to Marine Barracks, Washington and went straight to my quarters. The attorney's contact information was in the letter Father had shown me, and I'd memorized it. I called from my personal cell phone, not wanting this on any official records until I knew what I was dealing with. Daniels and Associates, a receptionist answered. I need to speak with whoever's handling the William Brooks Trust. This is Staff Sergeant Natalie Brooks, United States Marine Corps. There was a pause, then the sound of a transfer. A moment later, an older man's voice came on the line. Staff Sergeant Brooks. I've been expecting your call. This is Daniel Whitmore. I handled your grandfather's estate planning, including the private trust he established in 2009. 2009, that was the year I'd enlisted, the year I'd left for boot camp. Grandfather had set up this trust specifically after I'd joined the Marines. Mr. Whitmore, I need to understand what this is about. My father said there's a property and contents related to classified operations. There is. A small house in Beaufort, about 10 minutes from the water. Your grandfather purchased it privately in 1985, never disclosed it in any official documentation. He maintained it quietly for 30 years. When he knew his health was failing, he transferred it into an irrevocable trust with very specific terms for disclosure. Why me? Why those specific conditions? He didn't share his complete reasoning, but I can tell you what he did say. He said you were the only one in the family who'd chosen service over comfort, sacrifice over security. He said you were the only one he trusted to do the right thing with what he'd preserved, regardless of the personal cost. My throat tightened. Grandfather and I had never been particularly close. He'd been a distant figure during my childhood, formal and proper, more interested in military history and Navy traditions than in his grandchildren. I'd had maybe a dozen real conversations with him before he died. I hadn't known he'd paid attention to my choice to enlist, hadn't known he'd respected it. What's in the house, Mr. Whitmore? Documents primarily. Files, photographs, recorded testimonies. Materials related to Operation Phoenix in Vietnam and subsequent naval operations in Southeast Asia during the 1970s. Your grandfather was involved in intelligence work during that period, and he apparently preserved documentation of certain activities that were never officially reported. That sounded ominous. Operation Phoenix was the controversial CIA program that had targeted Viet Cong infrastructure through intelligence gathering and, according to critics, assassination. If grandfather had been involved in that and had kept unofficial records, the implications were significant. Is any of this currently classified? That's complicated. The operations themselves have been declassified. The specific activities and personnel involved remain sensitive. Your grandfather's personal documentation was never part of official records, so it was never technically classified to begin with. But the contents would certainly be of interest to various government entities if they knew it existed. Who else knows about this? Just me, my law partner who helped establish the trust, and now you. Your grandfather was very clear that discretion was essential. He didn't want this discovered until the right person could handle it properly. When can I access the property? Immediately, if you wish. I can meet you there tomorrow with the keys and the complete trust documents. The house has been maintained by a property management company, utilities kept current, everything preserved exactly as your grandfather left it. Tomorrow is Sunday. I'm aware. This seemed time-sensitive. Your grandfather specified that once you were notified, access should be provided as quickly as possible. He seemed to believe that once you met the conditions, circumstances might be such that immediate action was necessary. That was cryptic and concerning. What had grandfather anticipated? What situation had he foreseen that would require immediate access to decades-old documentation? I'll be there tomorrow. What time? 10 in the morning? I'll text you the address. And Staff Sergeant Brooks, one more thing. Your grandfather left a letter for you, separate from the trust documents. He instructed me to give it to you in person, before you entered the house. He said it was important that you read his words before you saw what he'd preserved. I hung up and sat in my quarters staring at the wall. Tomorrow I'd drive to Beaufort and unlock whatever secrets grandfather had kept for 40 years. Tomorrow I'd read words he'd written specifically for me, anticipating a future where I'd achieved rank and clearance and would need to know the truth about something he'd done or witnessed or covered up. I should have been anxious or frightened. Instead, I felt a strange calm, the same feeling I got before a mission when all the planning was done and it was time to execute. Grandfather had prepared me for this, whether he'd known it consciously or not. He'd waited until I had the training and the rank and the perspective to handle whatever I was about to discover. That evening, I filed my report on the Veterans Day ceremony with Major Torres, documenting the operation's success in precise military language. Then I requested 2 days of personal leave, starting the following morning. Torres approved it without question. I'd been working 70-hour weeks for months. I was due some time off. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about grandfather's stern face, his precise way of speaking, his insistence on proper protocol and chain of command. He'd seemed like the embodiment of military tradition, someone who colored strictly within the lines of regulation and proper conduct. The idea that he'd kept secret files, that he'd hidden documentation of questionable operations, didn't match the man I thought I'd known. Unless I'd never really known him. Unless the stern propriety had been a mask, a way of maintaining control while carrying the weight of things he couldn't officially acknowledge. I left Marine Barracks, Washington at 6 the next morning, driving south toward Beaufort in my personal vehicle. The route took me through Virginia countryside and into the Carolinas, familiar territory that I'd traveled during training exercises. Beaufort was a small coastal town with a significant Marine Corps presence, home to MCOS Beaufort and Marine Corps Recruit Depot Paris Island. It was the kind of place where military service was woven into the community identity, where everyone had a family member or friend who'd served. The address Whitmore had texted led me to a quiet street about 2 miles from the waterfront. The houses here were modest, built in the 1960s and 70s, well-maintained but clearly not the kind of neighborhood where admirals typically retired. Grandfather's Beaufort house was a small single-story with pale blue siding and white shutters, a neat yard with camellias blooming near the front steps. It looked like a place where someone might retire to fish and read, private and unremarkable. Daniel Whitmore was waiting on the front porch. He was in his 70s, trim and well-dressed, with the bearing of someone who'd spent time around military officers. He stood when I approached, extending his hand. Staff Sergeant Brooks. Thank you for coming so quickly. We shook hands and he produced a manila envelope from his briefcase. This is the letter your grandfather left for you. He was very specific that you should read it before entering the house, somewhere quiet where you could process his words without distraction. May I suggest the bench in the backyard? It's private and peaceful. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of several pages inside. The front was addressed in grandfather's precise handwriting. To Staff Sergeant Natalie Brooks, USMC. To be opened when she meets the conditions of trust and not before. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known I'd achieved the rank. He'd believed in me when no one else in the family had. I walked around the house to the backyard, a small space with a wooden bench overlooking an old oak tree. The November morning was cool but not cold, the kind of weather that made the South bearable. I sat on the bench and opened the envelope carefully. Inside were 5 handwritten pages, dated 2 months before grandfather died. His handwriting was less steady than I remembered, shakier, but still legible. I began to read. Natalie, if you're reading this, you've become the Marine I believed you would be. You've achieved rank through dedication and competence, and you've been entrusted with secrets that matter. I'm proud of you, though I never told you that while I was alive. That's one of many failures I'm writing to acknowledge. I was not a good grandfather to you. I saw how your father treated you, how your mother enabled his treatment, how your brother benefited from your exclusion. I saw it all and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in how Harrison raised his children. I told myself you were resilient and would find your own way. These were lies I used to excuse my own cowardice. The truth is that I saw something of myself in you. The same stubborn independence, the same refusal to perform for approval, the same desire to earn respect rather than inherit it. Your father never had those qualities. He was always more concerned with appearance than substance, more interested in reputation than character. I loved him because he was my son, but I never respected him the way I came to respect you. When you enlisted, against his wishes and his threats, I knew you'd made the right choice. The military breaks some people, but it forges others into something stronger than they knew they could be. I believed you were the forging type. Apparently, I was correct. Now, to the reason for this letter and this house. In 1971, I was a lieutenant commander assigned to naval intelligence operations in Southeast Asia. I was involved in activities that were classified then and remain sensitive now, operations that existed in the gray space between legal military action and illegal covert assassination. I participated in these operations because I was ordered to, because I believed we were serving national security interests, and because I was too young and too ambitious to question whether the ends justified the means. Over 3 years, I was party to operations that resulted in the deaths of over 200 individuals, some of whom were legitimate military targets, many of whom were civilians caught in networks we deemed threatening. We operated without oversight, without accountability, justified by the fog of war and the belief that winning mattered more than how we won. By 1974, I began to understand what we'd really been doing. I began to see the pattern of abuse, the way operational necessity became excuse for excess, the way classified status protected crimes. I started keeping records, not because I intended to expose anything, but because I needed to document what had happened. I needed proof that it had been real, that I hadn't imagined the moral compromises we'd made. When the war ended and I was reassigned stateside, I brought those records with me. I should have destroyed them or turned them over to proper authorities. I did neither. I kept them, hidden and secret, because I couldn't bring myself to destroy history and I couldn't bring myself to destroy careers, including my own. For 40 years, I've carried the weight of that choice. I rose through the ranks, became an admiral, was decorated and honored, all while knowing that my reputation was built partially on activities that should never have been authorized. I told myself that my later service redeemed the earlier compromises. I told myself that exposing the truth would serve no purpose beyond destroying institutions that had since reformed. These were more lies, more convenient excuses. The documents in this house detail operations that involved war crimes by any reasonable definition. They name officers who went on to distinguished careers. They describe activities that were covered up or euphemistically reported. They prove that the military's official history of certain operations is incomplete at best, false at worst. I'm leaving this to you because you're the only person I trust to do the right thing with it. Not the expedient thing, not the politically safe thing, but the right thing. You've already proven you value integrity over comfort. You've already shown you'll sacrifice approval for authenticity. What you do with these documents is entirely your decision. You could destroy them and let the past remain buried. You could report them through official channels, triggering investigations that will stir controversy and likely damage reputations of people long dead. You could preserve them for historical purposes without seeking immediate action. Each choice carries consequences, and I won't presume to tell you which is correct. I will only tell you this: the truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. The military's strength comes from accountability, from the willingness to acknowledge failures and correct them. Institutions that bury their mistakes become corrupt. People who hide their sins become hollow. I lived hollow for 40 years, Natalie. I don't recommend it. Whatever you decide, know that I believed in you. Know that I saw your strength when others saw defiance. Know that I left this burden to you not because I wanted to escape it, though I confess that was part of my motivation, but because I genuinely believed you were the person most capable of carrying it well. Semper Fidelis means always faithful. Be faithful to truth, even when your family asks you to protect lies. Be faithful to integrity, even when institutions pressure you towards silence. Be faithful to the person you've proven yourself to be. With respect and love I never adequately expressed, Admiral William Brooks, USN retired. I sat on that bench for a long time, holding grandfather's letter while the morning grew warmer around me. He'd seen me. Really seen me, in ways I'd never known while he was alive. He'd understood what my choice to enlist had meant, what my father's rejection had cost, what kind of person I was trying to become. And he'd trusted me with something explosive, something that could affect military history and institutional reputation and the legacy of officers who were now dead or elderly. He'd given me documents that proved crimes and cover-ups, then left the decision of what to do with them entirely in my hands. Daniel Whitmore appeared at the corner of the house. Are you ready to see what he preserved? I folded the letter carefully and stood up. Yes, I'm ready. The inside of the house was clean but frozen in time, decorated in the style of the early 1980s with wood paneling and harvest gold appliances. The furniture was sparse and functional, nothing personal except for a few framed photographs on the mantel. I recognized one of them immediately, a younger version of grandfather in his navy white standing beside a woman I'd never seen before. She was beautiful, with dark hair and a warm smile, and the way grandfather looked at her in the photograph suggested a closeness I'd never associated with him. Who is that? I asked Whitmore. That's Elizabeth Chen. She was a civilian intelligence analyst your grandfather worked with in Saigon. They were close during his tours in Vietnam. Very close, from what I understand. He was married to my grandmother during that time. Whitmore's expression was carefully neutral. Yes, he was. I can't speak to the nature of their relationship beyond what your grandfather told me, which was that she was someone he trusted more than anyone else in the war. She died in 1975 during the fall of Saigon. Your grandfather never spoke of her publicly after that. I looked at the photograph again, seeing something in grandfather's face I'd never seen in person. Vulnerability, maybe. Or genuine happiness unguarded by duty and protocol. Whatever his relationship with this woman had been, it had mattered deeply. The documents are in the study, Whitmore said, gesturing toward a closed door off the living room. Your grandfather converted one of the bedrooms into a secure workspace. Everything's organized chronologically and by operation. He was very methodical about documentation. The study was small and windowless, lit by overhead fluorescent lights that flickered on when Whitmore flipped the switch. One wall was covered in filing cabinets, military gray and precisely labeled. The opposite wall held shelves filled with binders, each one marked with dates and code names. A desk sat in the center of the room with an old typewriter and a locked drawer. This is 8 years of documentation, Whitmore said quietly. Your grandfather spent the last year of his life organizing it, writing explanatory notes, creating an index system. He wanted whoever received this to understand exactly what they were looking at. I approached the filing cabinets and read the labels. Phoenix Operations 1971 to 1973. Naval Intelligence Special Activities 1973 to 1975. Post-War Analysis and Assessment 1975 to 1978. Each drawer was marked with the same precision, each label revealing another piece of a story I'd never known existed. Has anyone else seen these documents? Only me, and only superficially. Your grandfather showed me enough to explain why the trust needed such specific conditions. He wanted someone with active security clearance because some of this material, while not technically classified since it was never part of official records, deals with operations that are still sensitive. He wanted someone with military rank because he believed only someone who'd served would understand the context and the weight of what these documents represent. I pulled open the first drawer labeled Phoenix Operations 1971. Inside were manila folders arranged in perfect order, each one containing typed reports, handwritten notes, and photographs. I pulled out the first folder and opened it on the desk. The documents inside were systematic and damning. Mission reports detailing targeted killings of suspected Viet Cong operatives. Intelligence assessments that showed minimal verification of targets before action was authorized. Photographs of casualties that included women and children. Notes in grandfather's handwriting questioning the intelligence that had justified specific operations. One report detailed an operation in a village north of Saigon where a suspected VC cell was believed to be operating. The mission resulted in 12 deaths. Grandfather's handwritten note at the bottom said, "Intelligence was wrong. Target was a wedding party. No VC presence confirmed. Reported as successful interdiction to command." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just documentation of classified operations. This was evidence of war crimes, of systematic abuse covered up by false reporting. And grandfather had participated in it, had written these reports himself before later questioning them in private notes. I spent the next 4 hours going through files, reading reports, studying photographs that made my hands shake. Whitmore left after the first hour, saying he'd wait in his car and to take whatever time I needed. I was grateful for the privacy because I needed to process what I was seeing without anyone watching my reaction. The pattern that emerged was clear and horrifying. Between 1971 and 1973, the operation's grandfather participated in had killed over 300 individuals, at least 80 of whom the documentation suggested were misidentified or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The intelligence that justified these operations was often thin or completely fabricated. The reporting back to command was systematically false, inflating enemy casualties and obscuring civilian deaths. Grandfather's role had evolved over those 3 years. In 1971, he'd been a junior officer following orders and writing reports as instructed. By 1972, he was questioning the intelligence but still executing missions. By 1973, his private notes showed deep moral conflict, but his official reports remained falsely optimistic. He'd known what was happening. He'd participated anyway. And he'd kept meticulous records of his own complicity. The files from 1973 to 1975 showed a different pattern. Grandfather had apparently tried to raise concerns through unofficial channels, speaking with other officers who shared his doubts. Several of these officers were named in the documents, complete with their subsequent career trajectories. One became a rear admiral. Another served as deputy director of naval intelligence. A third became a defense contractor executive whose company currently held billions in Pentagon contracts. All of them had participated in the same questionable operations. All of them had risen to positions of significant power. All of them had maintained official silence about what they'd done. The final section of files contained something unexpected. Starting in 1976, after the war ended and grandfather returned stateside, he'd begun documenting what he called reconciliation efforts. He'd located family members of some of the civilians killed in operations he'd participated in. Through intermediaries and Vietnamese contacts, he'd provided financial assistance, paid for education, helped with immigration to the United States when possible. He'd done this secretly, using his own money, never acknowledging his role in their relatives' deaths but trying to make some form of restitution. One folder contained letters from a woman named Nguyen Thi Mai whose father had been killed in the wedding party operation. Grandfather had helped her immigrate to the United States in 1982, had paid for her college education, had provided financial support until she was established. She'd never known why this American admiral had taken such interest in her welfare. She'd written him grateful letters that he'd kept, each one a reminder of what he'd taken from her. I sat at the desk as afternoon shadows lengthened across the room, trying to understand the man these documents revealed. Grandfather had committed acts that constituted war crimes by any reasonable standard. He'd participated in a system that killed innocent people and lied about it. He'd kept silent about these crimes for decades while rising through the ranks and accepting honors he knew he didn't fully deserve. But he'd also tried to make amends in the only ways he could without destroying his career and his family's standing. He'd helped dozens of Vietnamese families, spending what must have been hundreds of thousands of dollars over decades. He'd kept these records not to justify his actions but to document them accurately, to prevent the false official narrative from being the only narrative. And he'd trusted me, specifically me, to decide what should be done with this truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Major Torres. Hope your personal time is going well. Reminder that we have the presidential schedule review meeting Tuesday morning. See you then. Tuesday. 2 days away. I had 2 days to decide what to do with documentation that could trigger military investigations, destroy the reputations of senior officers both retired and active, and potentially affect current defense contracts worth billions. 2 days to decide whether truth or institutional stability mattered more. I walked out of the study and found Whitmore sitting in his car in the driveway, reading a newspaper. He looked up when I approached. Have you seen enough? For today. I need to think about this. Can I come back? The house is yours. Your grandfather transferred the deed into the trust with you as the beneficiary. You own this property and everything in it. You can come and go as you please. I stared at him. He gave me the house. He wanted you to have a place that was entirely yours, separate from your family and their expectations. He said you'd need somewhere private to make decisions that might go against their wishes. Grandfather had understood more than I'd realized. He'd known that whatever I decided to do with these documents, my family would pressure me to bury them. He'd given me a physical space that was mine alone, where I could think and plan without their interference. I drove back to Marine Barracks, Washington as the sun set, my mind churning through options and implications. I could destroy the documents and let the past remain buried, protecting the institution and the individuals involved. I could report them through official channels, triggering investigations that would be politically explosive and professionally risky. I could preserve them privately, holding the information without acting on it immediately. Each option had merit and each had significant costs. That night, I lay in my quarters staring at the ceiling and thinking about the oath I'd taken when I enlisted. I swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. The oath said nothing about protecting the institution when the institution had failed. It said nothing about covering up crimes because they were old. It called for true faith, for genuine loyalty, for defending principles even when institutions betrayed them. By morning, I'd made a decision. Not a final decision about what to do with the documents, but a first step. I needed advice from someone I trusted, someone who understood military justice and institutional politics and wouldn't be compromised by family loyalty or career concerns. I called Colonel Patricia Hayes, my mentor from my first assignment at Quantico. She'd retired 2 years ago after 30 years of service, the last 10 spent in the Judge Advocate General Corps handling military justice issues. She was brilliant, principled, and completely unafraid of difficult truths. She answered on the third ring. Natalie Brooks. I was wondering when you'd call. I saw your name in the program for the Veterans Day ceremony. Impressive assignment. Thank you, ma'am. I need your advice on something sensitive. Something that involves historical military operations and potential misconduct. There was a pause. How sensitive and how historical? Vietnam era. Operations that were never properly reported. Documentation that suggests war crimes and systematic cover-ups. Another pause, longer this time. And you have access to this documentation? I do. It was left to me by someone who participated in these operations and wanted the truth preserved, even if he couldn't bring himself to expose it during his lifetime. Come to my house tomorrow evening. Don't discuss this on phone or email. Bring whatever documentation you feel comfortable sharing, but be prepared to explain the full scope of what you've discovered. I spent Monday morning at the White House, attending meetings and reviewing security protocols for upcoming presidential events. I functioned normally, participated appropriately, gave no indication that my mind was elsewhere. This was a skill I'd developed over years of military service, the ability to compartmentalize, to focus on immediate duties while larger concerns waited for proper attention. In the afternoon, I drove back to Beaufort. I spent 3 hours in grandfather's study, photographing key documents with my phone, creating a condensed record of the most significant evidence. I selected reports that showed the pattern of misreporting, photographs that documented civilian casualties, notes that revealed grandfather's awareness of wrongdoing. I compiled everything into a secure folder on an encrypted drive. That evening, I drove to Colonel Hayes' house in Arlington. She lived in a modest townhouse near the cemetery, filled with books and military memorabilia and photographs from her 3 decades of service. She poured us both coffee and led me to her study. "Show me what you have." I walked her through the documentation, explaining grandfather's role in Phoenix operations, the pattern of false reporting, the evidence of civilian casualties, the subsequent cover-up. I showed her photographs and mission reports and grandfather's private notes. I explained his later attempts at restitution and his decision to preserve the truth for someone who might act on it. Hayes listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer as the scope of what I was describing became clear. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and was silent for a long moment. "This is bigger than you realize," she finally said. Operation Phoenix has been controversial for decades, but most of the specific operations remain classified or poorly documented. What your grandfather preserved is detailed evidence of systematic abuse in a program that senior military and intelligence officials have spent 50 years defending or downplaying. If you bring this forward, you won't just be challenging historical narrative. You'll be threatening current reputations and potentially billions in defense contracts. I know. Several of the officers named in these documents went on to senior positions. Some of them are still alive and influential in defense circles. Hayes nodded. "Which means you need to think very carefully about how you proceed, if you proceed at all. The military will not thank you for exposing this. They'll see you as disloyal to the institution, as someone airing dirty laundry to score political points or advance your career. The fact that you're currently assigned to the White House will make this worse, not better. People will assume you're leveraging your position for attention. So I should bury it?" She gave me a sharp look. "I didn't say that. I'm explaining what you're up against so you can make an informed decision. There are ways to bring this information forward that might minimize blowback, but there's no way to eliminate it entirely. You need to decide if the truth is worth what it will cost you professionally and personally. What would you do? If these were your documents, your decision?" Hayes was quiet for a moment, and I saw something complicated move across her face. 20 years ago, I would have told you to report it immediately through proper channels, consequences be damned. Truth and accountability matter more than institutional comfort. But I've seen what happens to whistleblowers, even legitimate ones with solid evidence. The institution protects itself. People who challenge it get marginalized, investigated, discredited. Your career would be over, Natalie. Not officially, but practically. You'd never advance beyond your current rank. You'd be passed over for assignments. You'd be quietly pushed out. And now? What would you tell me now? Now I'd tell you that truth still matters, but so does strategic timing. You don't have to make this decision immediately. You could preserve the documents, secure them properly, and wait for the right moment. Maybe that moment comes when you're more senior and have more institutional protection. Maybe it comes when there's a broader reckoning with military history and people are ready to hear difficult truths. Maybe it comes when you're retired and no longer vulnerable to career retaliation. That feels like cowardice. Like exactly what grandfather did, holding on to truth but not acting on it. Or it's wisdom. Your grandfather preserved this information for 40 years and then gave it to someone he believed could handle it properly. He didn't specify when you should act on it, only that you should decide. There's no moral imperative that says you must expose this immediately regardless of cost. I looked at the documents spread across Hayes' desk, at the photographs of villages destroyed and the reports of civilians killed and the evidence of systematic lying. Waiting felt wrong, but so did sacrificing my career when I could potentially do more good remaining in position to make changes from within. What if I'm just rationalizing? What if strategic timing is just another way of saying I'm too scared to do the right thing? Then you'll know that about yourself, Hayes said bluntly. And you'll have to live with it. But Natalie, you're 32 years old with a promising career in military intelligence. You could make colonel, maybe even general if you play your cards right. Someone with that rank in those positions could eventually push for real accountability reforms, could change how the military handles historical misconduct. Is it worth sacrificing that potential future impact for the immediate satisfaction of exposing crimes committed 50 years ago by people who are mostly dead? I didn't have an answer. Both paths seemed defensible and both seemed like betrayals. Reporting immediately felt righteous but potentially futile. Waiting felt strategic but possibly cowardly. Grandfather had given me this burden but no clear guidance about timing or method. I stayed at Hayes' house for another 2 hours, discussing options and implications. She helped me think through various approaches, from anonymous leaks to official military justice reports to academic historical documentation. Each approach had different risk profiles and different potential outcomes. None of them were clean or easy. When I finally left, she walked me to my car and put a hand on my shoulder. Whatever you decide, make sure it's your decision, not your family's and not the institution's. Your grandfather trusted you specifically because you've proven you'll make hard choices for the right reasons. Trust yourself the way he trusted you. I drove back to my quarters and spent most of the night reviewing everything again, looking for an option I'd missed, some approach that would honor truth without destroying my ability to serve. The answer didn't magically appear, but something else did. Clarity about what mattered most. I'd spent my entire adult life proving I was more than my family's assessment of me. I'd joined the Marines to escape their expectations and build my own identity. I'd achieved rank and position through competence and dedication. Everything I'd become was built on choosing integrity over comfort, on doing difficult things because they were right rather than because they were easy. If I buried grandfather's documentation, if I waited indefinitely for some perfect future moment that might never come, I'd be betraying the person I'd spent 12 years becoming. I'd be choosing institutional comfort over truth, exactly the choice grandfather had made and regretted for 40 years. But if I reported everything immediately without considering strategy or timing, I'd be making a gesture that felt righteous but might accomplish nothing beyond ending my own career. Grandfather had preserved this information for someone with rank and clearance, someone positioned to make the disclosure effective rather than just personally satisfying. By dawn, I'd reached a compromise with myself. I would take the documents to the Navy's Historical Center and the National Archives, presenting them as historical documentation that deserved proper preservation and academic study. This would put the information into official channels without immediately triggering criminal investigations. It would make the truth available to researchers and historians while giving institutions time to respond thoughtfully rather than defensively. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation some part of me wanted. It wasn't the immediate accountability that victims deserved. But it was truth entering the record, permanently and officially. It was sunlight on activities that had been hidden for 5 decades. It was the beginning of a process that might eventually lead to real reckoning. And it was something I could do without completely sacrificing my ability to continue serving, which meant I could potentially push for more accountability from within the system in the future. Tuesday morning, I attended the Presidential Schedule Review meeting as if nothing had changed. I briefed security assessments and coordination requirements with the same professionalism I always brought to the work. No one looking at me would have guessed that I was carrying evidence of military war crimes or planning to challenge decades of official narrative. That afternoon, I contacted the Navy Historical Center and arranged a meeting for the following week. I explained I had documentation related to Vietnam-era naval intelligence operations that had been privately preserved by a deceased admiral. They were immediately interested. Historical documentation from that period was often incomplete, and anything that filled gaps in the official record was valuable. I also contacted a military attorney I'd worked with on a previous assignment, someone I trusted to be discreet. I explained in general terms that I had documentation of potential historical misconduct and needed advice about proper disclosure channels. She agreed to consult with me privately, outside of any official capacity. The pieces were falling into place. I had a plan that felt honorable even if it wasn't immediately satisfying. I had expert advice and support from people I respected. I had a path forward that balanced truth with strategic wisdom. What I didn't have was any idea how my family would react when they discovered what I was planning to do with grandfather's legacy. My father found out 3 days before I was scheduled to meet with the Navy Historical Center. I don't know how he discovered my plans, whether someone at the archives mentioned the Brooks name or whether he'd been monitoring my activities somehow. What I know is that he called me at 7 in the morning, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "We need to talk. Today. This isn't negotiable. I'm working. Take the day off. This is about your grandfather and what you're planning to do with his property. If you go through with this, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." I met him at a coffee shop near Quantico, neutral territory where neither of us had advantage. He arrived with Richard Langford, his business partner, which told me this wasn't just about family. This was about business interests threatened by historical truth. Father didn't waste time on pleasantries. Langford's company has $700 million in active Navy contracts. 3 of the admirals on their board were involved in the operations your grandfather documented. If you release those files, you'll destroy their reputations and cost thousands of people their jobs. Those admirals participated in war crimes. They falsified reports and covered up civilian deaths. 50 years ago, during a war that was morally complicated for everyone involved. They were young officers following orders in an impossible situation. They don't deserve to have their entire careers destroyed because you've decided to play moral arbiter with incomplete information. The information is very complete. Grandfather was meticulous. Your grandfather was guilt-ridden and possibly suffering from early dementia when he compiled those files. His perspective was distorted by age and regret. You're taking the word of a dead man over the integrity of officers who served honorably for decades after Vietnam. I looked at Langford, who'd been silent until now. "How much money have you spent trying to bury this? How many people have you contacted to pressure me into keeping quiet?" Langford's expression didn't change. "I've made inquiries about the appropriate way to handle sensitive historical materials. I've suggested to people who might help you understand the implications of what you're considering. But no one's trying to bury anything. We're trying to prevent you from making a catastrophic mistake based on incomplete understanding. The archives will determine if my understanding is incomplete. They'll review the documentation professionally." Father leaned forward, his voice dropping. "If you do this, you're done. Not just with the family, which you clearly don't care about. You're done professionally. The Navy will make your life impossible. They'll transfer you to irrelevant positions. They'll block promotions. They'll ensure you never work on anything significant again. Is that really worth it? Destroying your career over something that happened before you were born? Some things matter more than careers." He sat back, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. "You really believe that? You actually think you're being noble?" "I think I'm being honest. Something grandfather couldn't be and something you've never tried to be." We left separately, and I knew the conversation was really an ultimatum. Stay quiet and keep the family comfortable, or face professional destruction and permanent estrangement. It was the same choice he'd given me at 19, just with higher stakes. 2 days later, I delivered the documentation to the Navy Historical Center. The archivists were professional and grateful, explaining that the materials would be cataloged, verified, and eventually made available to researchers following proper declassification procedures. The process would take months, possibly years. But the truth would enter the record permanently. That afternoon, I received notification that I was being reassigned from the White House to a logistics coordination position at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Effective immediately. The message was professionally worded, but the meaning was clear. Someone with influence wanted me away from high-visibility positions. I cleaned out my desk at the White House that evening, and Major Torres found me packing files into boxes. She closed the door and spoke quietly. "I don't know what you did or who you pissed off. But I want you to know you were one of the best Marines I've worked with. Whatever happens next, remember that competence matters more than politics in the long run." 3 weeks later, the story broke. Not through official Navy channels but through a military history researcher who'd accessed the newly archived materials. The journalist's article was careful and well-sourced, detailing Phoenix operation abuses with specific documentation. It named officers, including 3 current defense contractors. It credited Admiral William Brooks for preserving the historical record despite personal cost. The response was immediate and divided. Some praised grandfather's courage in documenting truth. Others condemned him for keeping silent during his lifetime. The Navy launched a formal review of Phoenix operations. 2 of the named admirals resigned from corporate boards. Congressional hearings were scheduled. My phone rang constantly for days, reporters wanting statements, historians wanting interviews, Navy investigators wanting depositions. I gave no interviews and referred all questions to official channels. This wasn't about me or my career. This was about truth finally being told. Father sent one final message, an email with no subject line. You've destroyed everything grandfather built. You've humiliated our family and cost good people their reputations. I hope you're satisfied with what you've accomplished. Don't contact us again. I deleted it without responding. 6 months later, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter from Nguyen Thi Mai, the woman whose father had died in the wedding party operation. She'd read the news coverage and finally understood why an American admiral had helped her family decades ago. Her letter was gracious and heartbreaking, thanking grandfather for his attempt at restitution while acknowledging it could never repair what had been taken. She included a photograph, her father on his wedding day, smiling beside his young bride. The same wedding that grandfather's unit had destroyed. I hung the photograph in the Beaufort house, beside grandfather's picture with Elizabeth Chen. 2 loves, 2 losses, 2 different kinds of casualty from the same war. I still work at Quantico, coordinating logistics that matter but don't make headlines. I was passed over for promotion last cycle, and I'll likely be passed over again. My career ceiling is visible now, staff sergeant until retirement. The price of choosing truth over comfort. But I sleep well. I've built relationships with other Marines who value integrity over advancement. I've started teaching ethics classes for junior enlisted, helping them think through difficult choices before they face them in crisis. I've made the Beaufort House into a place where military families can stay while processing their own complicated legacies. Trevor calls occasionally, brief conversations where he updates me on family news I don't ask about. Mother sent a Christmas card last year with a short note saying she understood why I'd done what I'd done, even if father never would. Small acknowledgments that mean more than they probably should. The truth is that being right doesn't always feel victorious. Justice doesn't always feel satisfying. Doing the right thing often costs more than you want to pay. But the alternative, living hollow like grandfather described, carrying secrets that corrode your integrity, that costs even more. I'm Natalie Brooks, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. My rich father called me just a grunt, dismissed my service as beneath our family's dignity. He was wrong about what matters, wrong about what creates worth, wrong about where real honor comes from. And when I had to choose between his approval and my integrity, between institutional comfort and documented truth, I chose the path that let me keep respecting the person I see in the mirror. Some people inherit wealth or status or family names that open doors. I inherited a different legacy, truth that needed telling and the courage to tell it. That inheritance, the one my grandfather left specifically for me, turned out to be worth more than anything my father could have given me. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. Not to institutions that protect lies, not to families that demand complicity, but to truth and integrity and the oath I took to defend principles bigger than comfort. That's what being a Marine really means. That's what grandfather finally understood. And that's what I'll carry forward, whatever it costs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.